Good evening. Is it on? Can you hear me? On behalf of the International Communication Association, I would like to welcome you this evening for our event called The Hollywood Shuffle, Exploring Race and Ethnicity Behind and in Front of the Camera. This is the first event in a series that the International Communication Association is sponsoring in conjunction with universities throughout the world. This evening we have the honor of being the University of Southern California. Our next event is going to be held in London in May, and that's going to be with the BBC, and we're going to be looking at issues of training journalists throughout the world. But this evening, we have a very special event planned for you, and it is my honor to first introduce to you J.P. Gutierrez, who is the Communication Director for the International Communication Association, and he will tell you more about this evening and what's to follow. Thank you.
I'm going to put this back. Oh, yeah. This is Cynthia Stoll, the president of ICA. She's at University of California, Santa Barbara. I'm John Paul Gutierrez. I'm the communication director for ICA. So I just wanted to say a few words, and after me, only one other person is going to talk, and Stacy's going to take the stage. So we'll get going fast. But one of the reasons ICA wanted to do this was because we wanted to, part of our mission is to make sure our members' research gets out to the people who can actually make a difference in every day. And so that's what's important here about diversity in film, having people come through the industry and academia and just consumers. And this is one of the ways that we can kind of connect those two people. The second thing I want to say is about picking LACMA as a place to have this. LACMA's kind of been one of the best places for cultural diversity in Los Angeles, and it's been a big driver of that. Even as a child, when I came here, our mother would take us here to look at the Diego Riveras because she wanted us to know that Mexicans can do the good things too, and I think this is very representative of what we're going to do here tonight. So this is also logistically it's between USC and UCLA, so it's perfect. And the last thing I want to say is that we really couldn't have done this without USC Annenberg, obviously with all the branding. So I'll hand it over to USC Annenberg's Dean, Ernie Wilson.
Thanks, JP, and good evening to everyone. In continuing the tradition, I also want to make 3 quick points. The first quick point is I want to thank the ICA, especially President Stoll, for their cooperation. Also, I want to thank LACMA, our good friends at LACMA. We do a lot of stuff with LACMA, and you're absolutely right. They take on issues that are controversial, especially in the areas of diversity, and so it's always a pleasure to work with them. I'm going to say something about Dr. Smith in 2 seconds, but I first want to sort of confess that the Annenberg School for Communication, which you've heard a bit about, and you'll see our wonderful Professor Stacy Smith, who will lead this discussion, is deeply engaged in these issues of diversity broadly defined. The presentation that you will hear this evening and Stacy's work is one excellent example of that. But I'm very proud to say that the Journalism Educators Association has awarded its highest award to the Annenberg School for the work that we do in multicultural journalism, both in the United States and around the world. We're working closely with the NAACP on these exact same issues. And in the theme of working with policymakers in Washington, we've had the privilege of working, privilege and struggle sometimes, working with the Federal Communications Commission on some of their rulemaking. They asked us to do a study on diversity in the digital age, and that's actually available on our website. And then finally, I want to thank, there are several people in the audience who were very helpful to me when I was doing work for a presentation that I gave in November on W.E. Du Bois and what W.E.B. Du Bois would say about the digital age. And I'm just going to close out this one quick remark with the following stunning observation. So I spent months and months working a research assistant to death, occasionally dipping in to do my own research. And the most shocking thing to me, and I'm sure we'll talk about this evening, is that the consumption of media, especially by people of color, is going through the roof, in absolute and in per capita terms. So African Americans are overrepresented in the use of Twitter, for example, and blogging, and other kinds of media. So those numbers, the consumption numbers, are going like this. What's happening to the ownership numbers? Down. And as Stacy's work demonstrates, and as the FCC and all the trade associations and the guilds demonstrate, that while consumption is going this way, producers, directors, writers, actors in percentage terms are at best stagnant, and most of them going down. The FCC said that in 2009, the number of African American owned broadcast assets was 1% of the total. 1%. It is now 0.7%. So the question I just sort of toss out here is, how does it happen that consumption, and the figures are a little bit better for women, but not much better, and we're talking 6 or 7 people or 2 or 3 people difference, as Stacy's work illustrates. So how is it that one part of the scissors is going this way and the other part of the scissors is going this way? And it's probably the American culture and our ability to understand the United States is getting cut in the middle by that disjuncture, because people of color, women, tend to write about what they know. And the same is true for other groups as well. It really is a pleasure to introduce Stacy Smith, Professor Smith. Professor Smith and I were just in New York, in Manhattan. She took Manhattan by storm. Every place she gave a talk, she got standing ovations. Every place she talked, our parents would rush up and say to her, "My daughter took 3 of your classes." And she cried when she couldn't get into the 4th class. Professor Smith's work is widely cited. Her latest study, I think, was cited by over 1,000 news outlets around the United States and around the world. The work that she does is quantitative, qualitative, and she has a wonderful feel also for the way in which theory and analysis fits together in the real world. So she's in constant dialogue with the producers and directors and actors at the highest level. She's a wonderful colleague, a wonderful friend, a great teacher, and so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Stacy Smith.
Okay, where's Mark? Okay, well, I'm going to just do this like I do it at school, because that's the only way I know how to present. You want me to use the mic? Okay. Let's see if I can get a little... There we go. We have a great panel. We have a dream team. JP and I met a few months ago back at USC and thought about who we could put together on a panel. And we have assembled an amazing group of individuals that are accomplished in so many different ways. The way in which this presentation is going to work over the next hour or so, or hour and a half, is we're going to have 3 short academic presentations from 3 different perspectives. So I think you'll really tonight get an appreciation of race and ethnicity in television and film from a social science perspective, maybe even a cultural perspective and a legal perspective. And after we have the academic presentations, we're going to bring up 2 notable directors, Tim Story and Ava DuVernay, who I'll introduce in just a minute, and have a conversation about some of the very issues that Ernie just discussed, about patterns of consumption, barriers or impediments behind the camera and in front of the camera, and maybe solutions to some of the issues that we might see in the patterns in the presentations this evening. But I want to thank you all for coming. We appreciate you coming out on a Friday night to LACMA. I know how difficult that is, because it's not a very nice place, and really have to do what we can to get you here. But I'd like to thank JP, I'd like to thank Helen, I'd like to thank all the folks at USC and ICA, Cynthia, Larry, Ernie, and for all their efforts to make this event happen. What I'd like to do is just overview for you some of the work I've been doing at the Annenberg School since 2005. That's when we started working on many of these issues, thinking about first gender, but also race and ethnicity and other issues of diversity, whether it pertains to age, class, or even shape and size. And what I'd like to do is just take you through 3 questions that I think are important to answer when we're having a discussion about who we see and hear in the media. So I'll have 3 questions and 3 answers, and then what I'll do in between each presentation is introduce the subsequent panelists. My first question is, whose faces do we see in the mass media? And most of my work focuses on popular media. Okay, so the first study I want to overview was funded by the C. Jane program, and we looked at race and ethnicity along with a whole series of other factors in 129 motion pictures, G, PG, and PG rated films, top box office performers from 2006 to 2011, 5,839 speaking characters on screen. We looked at 275 primetime programs from 10 broadcast and cable channels. Those shows were on the air last spring, so also very recent data. And then the top, or the highest rated shows for 2 to 5-year-olds and 6 to 11-year-olds, according to Nielsen data. To answer this question, whose faces do we see in popular media? Now, to answer that question, you'll see that race and ethnicity of every speaking character. The unit of analysis in this investigation is the character that speaks 1 or more words audibly and discernibly on screen or is referred to by name. We are like census researchers looking at the entire population of characters in top-grossing films, which are on your far left, primetime television programs, which is in the middle column, and children's television shows on the far right. What I think is remarkable about this table, we're talking over 11,000 speaking characters across 3 platforms, the consistency across media. 3/4 of all speaking characters are Caucasian, 10 to almost 13% are Black or African American. Asians represent 3 to about 6% of speaking characters. But the third row, I think, is really interesting in terms of thinking about U.S. population data. 17% of the United States categorize themselves as Hispanic or Latino, and yet we see a very distinct underrepresentation in this third row. Now, to address Ernie's question about consumption, we know from the MPAA report that was just released a few days ago, a full 26% of individuals that go to the movies in this country, 26% are Hispanic Latino. Okay, so we see a very big disconnect between consumers and who we're seeing on screen. Okay, so we're seeing an underrepresentation of some groups in popular media. Now, the second question I want to address, because it's not just about prevalence. Prevalence is important to visibility, but we know how characters are portrayed can also have an effect on consumers. We know from the literature on sexualization and thin ideals that exposure to sexualized images of girls and women can lead to body shame, appearance anxiety, internalization of the thin ideal, and decreased task performance for some girls and women. So at the Annenberg School, we've been assessing or evaluating the hypersexualization, a series of indicators of girls and women across popular media. Here's what we see when we think about sexuality or the sexualization of girls and women in film in particular. I can talk a little bit about television later if you're interested during the Q&A. But if we were to look at the percentage of females shown in sexually revealing attire, both girls and women, so tight, alluring apparel, we see that Hispanics, the most underrepresented group for just females, all the way down this column, are the most sexualized in film. Okay, that's the first major trend. They're more likely to be shown in sexy attire, partially naked or fully naked, thin. We measured this on a 7-point continuum. It's those characters that are thin or extremely thin according to line drawings that are used in the body image research or referred to as attractive or beautiful by other characters. The second point on this chart that's really important to think about is there are very little differences, and these should be flipped. Unfortunately, they didn't get flipped. This 25% belongs here. My apologies. This 10% belongs here. These two columns do not look that different. Okay, there's a lot of theorizing about the sexualization of different groups by race, and what we found in this study with, once again, 11,000 plus characters, well, in family films we had 5,000 characters, very little differences between Caucasian females and black females. The most undersexualized were Asian characters in the sample. Okay, so not only do we see some interesting patterns with prevalence, we also see that portrayals can vary by race. Now, my third question that I want to just briefly address here is whose work is being represented by popular media. Now, if we are seeing differences on screen in the presentation of different groups that don't match consumption patterns or population estimates, which are very crude in terms of thinking about issues of representation as a measure or a standard to which we're comparing, it may be important to step back behind the camera. And you're about to hear a presentation on writers in just a minute, but I wanted to present some data on directors. We know that directors are at the helm. They can shapeshift an entire movie and story. Their vision steps in, and we're going to talk to two individuals in a little bit about their visions in storytelling. And so I was interested, along with my team, who's working behind the camera and how does that affect what we see on screen. So we were commissioned by the Sundance Institute to look at top grossing films from 2002, 100 of the top grossing films, through 100 of the top grossing films from 2012. A total of 1,100 films. It calculates to 1,220 directors. We coded or evaluated whether each of those characters was African American, black, or not, to give us an idea of what's going on behind the camera in terms of race. What was fascinating is looking at the line of the percentage of African American or black directors from 2002 to 2012. Black directors only represent 5.5% of all directors in the top studio films over the last 11 years. This calculates to 67 directors that are black or African American. Now, what's fascinating about this is there are many individuals that are working more than once. They're working multiple times. So this isn't an actual authentic number. It's not 68 different people that are working. It's only 38 people that have worked in the top 1,100 films over the last 11 years. Only 3 of which are women, black women. There are only 3 in this line. Okay, so I think that we have a real representational problem behind the camera, and who's behind the camera may affect what we see on screen. Now, I just want to make note of 2 separate things on this graph. The highest performing director from 2002 to 2012 may not be who you think it is. It's not Steven Spielberg, it's not Clint Eastwood, it's not Martin Scorsese. It's Tyler Perry. He had a film every single year. The second highest performer is on our panel tonight, Tim Story. So with 5 films coming in over the course of the last 11 years. Now, my last question that I want to address, or building on this issue, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Hunt, is there a relationship between who's behind the camera and who's on screen? We looked at the top 100 grossing films in 2010 and evaluated director race, whether they're a black director or not a black director, and then assessed diversity on screen. We were interested in are black directors showing stories with more black characters than if you do not have a black director behind the camera. And here's what we found. When you did not have a black director, motion pictures only featured 8.6% of characters that were African American or black, below census norms, below who goes to the movies. But if you had a black director, the percentage of black characters on screen exponentially increases to 57%. Why is this important? Paints a picture of the types of stories that are actually being told or how you might achieve diversity on screen. It can also suggest that individuals that studio heads, executives that are telling stories with black casts may be attaching black directors to those movies. We need more data, qualitative data, interviewing directors, writers, producers about their experiences behind the camera. So 3 questions, 3 brief answers, looking at directors and on-screen representation. Now, I'd like to hand it over to one of my esteemed colleagues who I'm very delighted to hear his work. It was just released, I think, in the popular press a few weeks ago, so you might have read about his research. Dr. Darnell Hunt is the director for the Center of African American Studies and a professor of sociology at UCLA. His research interests are expansive, but he has written quite prolifically on race and the media. He's done work back in the early 2000s with the Screen Actors Guild and Race and Ethnicity. And since 2005, he's been the author of the Hollywood Writers Report, which has issued briefs by the Writers Guild of America West in 2005, 2007, 2009, and then just a few weeks ago. He holds a PhD in sociology from UCLA. But for the record, he received his bachelor's degree in journalism from USC. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Darnell Hunt.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, now we have to figure out the electronics here. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, I have feet in both ends of the city here, USC and UCLA. But I'm really happy to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation. Okay, so it all begins with the writing. From concept to characters, from plot to narrative, writers play a foundational role in the fashioning of the stories the society circulates about itself. But in the Hollywood entertainment industry, unfortunately, there has all too often existed a disconnect between the writers hired to tell our stories and an America that's becoming increasingly diverse with each passing day. So, as Stacy alluded to, this talk takes a look primarily at the writing, employment in television and film, and I'm going to look at it over a 20-year period, just to kind of give you a sense of the time frame we have here, between 1991 and 2011. As Stacy mentioned, the Writers Guild of America West, which is the guild that represents writers in Hollywood, film, and television, just released a staffing brief earlier this week, actually. It was Tuesday. We had a press conference at the guild that reported on findings for the last decade. But I'm going to expand our gaze today and look actually over 20 years. So this talk highlights 2 groups of writers who have traditionally been underemployed in the Hollywood industry, and I'm talking about women and minority writers. It documents the employment experiences of these groups of writers relative to their male and white counterparts in order to identify any patterns that might suggest progress or retreat on the industry diversity front. Let me tell you a little bit about the data. First of all, I'm going to be referencing reports that were released in 1998 by my colleagues Bill Bilby, University of California, Santa Barbara. Of course, he's since moved on, but he actually authored with his wife the earlier Hollywood Writers Reports that look at data going back to the 1980s. I took over from them in 2005, and I'll be talking about reports that I did in 2005, 7, 9, and the one that came out for 2013. So this is where the data come from. The data are based on Writers Guild earning files. That is to say, every writer who's employed in the industry has to report their earnings to the Guild for the purposes of paying dues. That data is kept in a master file and gives us access to every single writing project that's covered by the collective bargaining agreement between the Guild and the various studios and networks. So it's pretty comprehensive data that takes a look at most of your major films and television shows. I'm also going to be talking about a subset of the data, which comes from the staffing file. And this is what we released on Tuesday. This data actually comes from set visits and other communications between Guild employees and showrunners and others who are actually on the television sets to find out what the population of writers in any given season are for the television shows that are on the air. And that's where most of the TV data that I'm reporting tonight come from. Okay, so let's talk about some of the trends. Well, the first thing we see is between 1991 and 2011, women writers' share of television staff employment increased about 5 percentage points from 25% to 30.6%. So again, over a 20-year period, we're talking about only a 5.6 percentage point increase. Considering just the rate of increase since 2001, however, it would take another 42 years for women, roughly half of the US population, to catch up with men and reach proportionate representation in television staff employment. And for the record, in the 2011-2012 season, the last season for which we have data, there were 519 women writers employed across the 190 shows and 28 networks that we looked at in the staffing report. So let's look at minorities. Between the 1999 and 2000 and 2011-2012 seasons, the overall minority writers' share of television employment increased from 5% to 15.6%, a tripling. But this tripling of the minority employment share over the 20 seasons, however, barely kept pace with the overall growth in the minority share of the US population. If you look at the green line there, you see that this minority share of the US population has increased from 24.4% in 1990 to about 36.3% in 2010. As a result, minorities as a combined group remain underrepresented by a factor of more than 2 to 1 in television staff employment. Again, for the record, there were 269 minority writers employed on the 190 shows for the 2011-2012 season. And I don't have time to get into it now, but there were some pretty radical differences between specific minority ethnic groups in terms of the amount of work they had. The picture for Latinos, as Stacy pointed out in front of the camera, was much worse than it was for the other groups. They were the most underrepresented group. Okay, focusing on the 2011-2012 season, the latest season for which we have data, we find that women accounted for only 18.6% of the executive producers staffing television shows. This figure actually represented a 4.2% increase over the group's 14.4% share a season earlier. Nonetheless, as women represent slightly more than half of the US population, the group remains underrepresented by a factor of more than 2 to 1 among writers who run television shows. Let's look at minorities. Between 1991 and 2010, we see that minorities were underrepresented as well among the ranks of executive producers. Here, the story is even worse. Just 9% of the projects in the pipeline had at least one minority writer. In other words, women and minorities are significantly underrepresented at both the pitching and writing phases of the television production process. Okay, I'm going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about the pilot pipeline. The television pilot process for the 2010-2011 season was examined in order to identify any significant patterns in the writers associated with the 566 projects that were in the pipeline. I should note the data have not yet been collected for the 2011-2012 pilot season. We're doing that right now. The first thing we see is just 24% of the pilots in the pipeline for the season had at least one woman writer attached to it. And just 9% of the projects in the pipeline had at least one minority writer. When we look at film, we see that between 1991 and 2010, women writers' share of film employment was flat, right at about 17%. Slightly more than half of the population, again, women for the past 20 years, have remained underrepresented by a factor of about 3 to 1 among film writers. And in fact, for 2010-2011, there were 280 women writers employed. Minority writers have actually fallen further behind. Between 1991 and 2010, the minority share of film writing employment increased a paltry 2.4 percentage points from just 3% of employment to about 5.4% of employment. Meanwhile, over the same period, the minority share of the US population increased nearly 12 percentage points from 24.4 to 36.3. The result? The gap between the minority share of overall population and the minority share of the film employment is even larger today than it was in 1991. Minorities remain underrepresented by a factor of nearly 7 to 1 in film employment. And just by comparison, 2010-2011, there were 88 minority writers working in film. Okay, very quickly, some conclusions. The core of television writers, as we have seen, is disproportionately white and male. Indeed, the industry as a whole is a highly insular one in which white male decision makers typically reproduce themselves by hiring other whites who share similar experiences and tastes. It's a relationship-oriented business. Unfortunately for writers of color, this means that it's hard to break in the first place, and then to develop the relationships necessary for subsequent opportunities. The long-term result has been periodic pockets of promise overwhelmed by the reality of minimal progress. The industry has been remarkably successful at insulating itself against criticisms that might have restructured other industries with similar statistics concerning employment inequalities. In fact, Russell's work, I'm pretty sure, will look at some of these realities. A recent historical study from 2012 adds additional perspective as we try to come to grips with the industry's stubborn stagnation on the diversity front. It traces what it calls the industry's colorblind conservatism to Jack Valenti's legendary efforts in the late 1960s as head of the MPAA to promote the film industry both on Capitol Hill and to the broader public. A member of President Nixon's inner circle, Valenti, the study argues, was an important architect of conservative laissez-faire approach to racial inequality. This strategy relied upon the promotion of a colorblind discourse that celebrated Hollywood's claim that it cared only about talent and the bottom line. And this claim, of course, was strategically employed to mute activist demands for state intervention on the behalf of underrepresented minorities. In much of my writing to date on these issues, I've underscored the need to go beyond business as usual industry practices if any real progress is to be made on the industry diversity front. I look forward in the coming discussion to exploring some of these possibilities for progressive change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darnell. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our next panelist who will do a brief presentation that I have been anticipating hearing for years because when I read the article that he'll be discussing today, I knew, in fact, that at some point I would want to get him in front of a crowd to discuss his work. Russell Robinson is a Distinguished Haas Chair in LGBT equity and a professor of law at UC Berkeley. And to be, in terms of full disclosure, he was at UCLA, but not any longer. It's all good. He has a variety of research interests pertaining to race and sexuality, constitutional law, and today he'll be discussing media and entertainment law. He's authored a number of scholarly articles appearing in a series of different law journals, but today he's going to be discussing artistic freedom and anti-discrimination norms, and this particular article was published in the California Law Review in 2007. Please warmly welcome Professor Russell Robinson.
So thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm excited that people are actually interested in talking about this topic. You never know if anyone will show up. Thank you very much to Stacy, to Mark, to USC, ICA, all the people that have organized this. It's a real treat to be here and to be in conversation with Stacy and Darnell, who I feel like are fellow travelers in terms of talking about a topic that oftentimes makes people uncomfortable. So I'm glad that you all came out on a Friday night to have this uncomfortable conversation. So Stacy mentioned in 2007, I published a law review article that examines tension between anti-discrimination law and artistic freedom in the context of casting roles in film. And also, about a year ago, I released an update that focused on the Academy Awards and the impact of race and gender in the careers of Oscar nominees and winners. I thought it'd be interesting to sort of look at the people at the top of the industry in terms of actors that are very successful and see if we see racial stratification even among the most elite actors. And so we framed the report in terms of thinking about what's changed in the 10 years since the 2002 Oscars, when you might recall Halle Berry and Denzel Washington won lead actors during the same year. You might recall Halle Berry's very emotional speech saying that her victory was for Diane Carroll and Lena Horne and every faceless, nameless woman of color out there, right? And so we wanted to ask, well, have we seen progress? Have we seen change that opened the floodgates in terms of representation for women of color and men of color? And basically we concluded, and this is the title of the report, not quite a breakthrough, right? So some of our major findings, and then after sort of summarizing the report a little bit, which you can find online if you Google Russell Robinson, not quite a breakthrough, it should come up. After summarizing the report, I will talk about what the law could do potentially to address some of these problems. So some of the major findings from the report were that all Best Actress winners after Halle Berry were white. So you had 10 years of white winners. We thought that we would break the streak with Viola Davis last year. Everybody was sort of expecting her to win. And Meryl got her third Oscar, I think, right? So it didn't quite happen. No winner in any acting category during the last 10 years has been Latino, Asian American, or Native American. So I just want to sort of emphasize that in this context, Asian Americans and Latinos perhaps are worse, have it worse than African Americans, right? They're just complete erasure when it comes to Latinos and Asian Americans. With African Americans, there's underrepresentation, there's stereotyping, so there are a lot of harms that we face as well. Oscar winners and nominees of color make fewer movies per year after their nominations than their white peers do. So there's a tendency where you'll have promising actors that get nominations. So a few years ago, the film Babel featured Adriana Barraza and Rinko Kikuchi, and they both got supporting actress nominations, and they basically disappeared from mainstream film after that. It was sort of a one-time opportunity, but it didn't open up a portal of progress in future roles and future Oscar nominations for them. Oscar winners and nominees of color are more likely than their white peers to work in television. So Don Cheadle, who's an Oscar nominee, has explained that he chose his role in House of Lies because it was a full-fledged character who has a family and gets to play like a real flesh and blood person, not just like, the best friend. And finally, Oscar winners and nominees of color are less likely than their white peers to receive subsequent nominations. Okay, so they're not getting, even once you're nominated or even after you win, you're not getting more Oscar caliber roles. There were some signs of progress. So from 1990 to 2000, roughly 9% of the nominees were people of color. That number jumped to 20% in the next decade. However, it still falls short of the 35 or so % of the public that is of color. Moreover, we need to think not just about quantity, but about quality. And this is, I think, the part of the conversation that we are least likely to have, right? So it's not just, I want to see black people on screen, but what are they doing, right? How are they making us look, right? And so that's kind of the harder thing to talk about. But I think that the reality is that we see Hollywood has certain preferences for how they want to see African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, et cetera. And so, for example, Oscar seems to have a fondness for maternal, overweight black female roles, right? So in other words, mammies, basically, right, of one version or another. Consider Octavia Spencer, Monique, of course, won for Precious. And so these are obviously different characters, but there are some commonalities that cut across them, right? Taraji Henson, Queen Latifah. There's a typical type of character that is celebrated by Oscar when it comes to black women, and contrast them with Best Actress winners. So most of the wins have come in the context of Best Supporting Actress, which I think is sort of a secondary place where Oscar likes its black women, right? But if you look at sort of who wins Best Actress, you get sort of young, white, sexy women like Jennifer Lawrence, Natalie Portman, Reese Witherspoon, Julia Roberts. Halle Berry is the sole woman of color to slip into this category, and we haven't seen anybody follow in her footsteps. So this divergence sets white women and women of color on distinct career paths. Jennifer Lawrence has a half dozen juicy roles on her plate right now, and I love Jennifer Lawrence, for the record, okay? But I also love Jennifer Hudson, right? And where have we seen her lately? Weight Watchers commercials, and a small role on Smash, right? Which nobody's watching, sorry. And so you can sort of see the preference in terms of how Hollywood likes to see African Americans. And I would say the sort of short way of saying it is sort of Hattie, not Halle, right? That sort of there are more roles for people that are going to perform in a Hattie McDaniel way instead of a Halle Berry. And if you can see this from also the Vanity Fair covers. A few years ago, there was a controversy when the sort of Hollywood issue showing the next decade was all white women. Well, again, this is very consistent. This pool then creates the people that can be nominated for Oscars. Did they fix it a couple years later? Well, the main cover is just as white as the last one, but if you look in the seam, you know, when you flip it open, there actually are 2 women of color in there, right? So that's sort of the fix. So what role can the law play in disrupting these patterns of exclusion? So there are various laws that are potentially relevant in this context, but I'm going to focus on the most obvious law, which is Title VII, the federal law that bans discrimination in employment based on race, sex, and other traits. Although race and sex can limit employment opportunity in many stages of the casting process, the evidence of such discrimination is most overt and most vulnerable to a Title VII lawsuit in the context of a casting breakdown that takes race or sex into account. Now, what's a breakdown? I'm sure everybody here knows what a breakdown is because it's Hollywood, right? But I'm going to explain for that 1 or 2 person that might not know, right? So it's actually, there's a company called Breakdown Services, which parses scripts into descriptions of roles and transmits these breakdowns to talent agents, which are then used to cast actors. And so the breakdowns play a critical role in terms of saying who can actually be considered for a role. If it says white, you know, and you're black, most agents won't even submit you for that, right? Because it says it's designated for somebody else. Now, if this were any other profession, it would clearly violate the law, right? I mean, you can't say we're hiring an attorney who's white only, right? But in Hollywood, people basically disregard Title VII. A controversy arose recently around HBO's Girls, where the breakdowns were revealed, and as you might have heard, they sort of specified that the nannies were to be black and Latina, whereas, of course, the main roles are white. And then there was also an Acura commercial where they were casting a black male actor who was supposed to be nice-looking, friendly, not too dark. And even the occasionally used phrase and breakdowns open to all ethnicities troubles, and that it suggests that breakdowns do not incorporate that phrase, are not open to all. They're reserved for whites. As these examples show, Hollywood takes race into account on a daily basis, even as Title VII uniformly prohibits race preferences in employment advertisements, and we are said to exist in a post-racial world. So I think I'm out of time, but hopefully I'll have time to say a little bit more during the Q&A.
Great. That was fantastic. Thank you, Russell. I'd like to bring up all of our panelists, and I'll take a seat up here, and I'll introduce our two directors as well. So if the panelists would all like to come up, so we can have a conversation, and then we'll discuss for 15, 20 minutes, and then probably open it up to the audience. I want to introduce 2 folks on the panel. To my right is Ava DuVernay. She's a director, producer, writer, and distributor of independent films. And the last title, she has an amazing slate of films, working multiple genres. Her first film was a critically acclaimed dramatic feature, I Will Follow. She's helmed multiple documentaries, This Is My Life, This this mic sounds nice. She finished directing a fashion film for Prada entitled The Door, and she's in post-production on a documentary, I believe, on Venus Williams. Just a few other notable achievements about Ava, if that's not enough. She's the founder of the African American Film Festival Releasing Movement, which is something we need to talk about in light of the discussion today. She was the winner of the Sundance Film Festival Best Directing Award in 2012 for her second feature, Middle of Nowhere. Congratulations. And she graduated from UCLA. And to her right is the second, the person on my chart, the highest producing director in Hollywood in the studio realm. And he's a director, a producer, a writer, Tim Story. We're so glad you're here. Tim has helmed 8 motion pictures. You probably know him from the Fantastic Four franchise. In terms of box office performance, through the roof. More recently, he was the director of the successful hit Think Like a Man. Other notable films include Barbershop and Taxi. He also has executive producing credits in television with a variety of shows, Standoff, 12th Man. The list can go on. And most importantly, he's a graduate of USC Film School. Fight on. So panelists, thank you so much for being here and listening to our research. And I just want to kick off our first question, and we'll probably only get through a few because I want the audience to ask questions as well. We just overviewed the status quo pertaining to race and ethnicity on screen, behind the camera, for directors, writers. And so first off, I want to ask Ava and Tim, what's your reaction to the state of race and ethnicity that you saw in some of the presentations, and how does that reflect or deviate from your experiences as you've navigated your careers, whether it's in the studio realm, the documentary realm, or the independent realm?
It's emotional. I mean, I sat there and listened to the stats, but you're talking about me. When you say that there are 3 women, who are in this top grossing category. And then also, I think, well, you're there from the minute you started. I said, you're not talking about me because I don't work in this space. I've chosen not to knock on a closed door, and that was a deliberate decision from the beginning. Having been a publicist in the industry, having worked on a lot of the films, both mainstream and otherwise, some of Tim's films as well, as a publicist and a marketer, really understanding the intricacies of the industry and the barriers. When I got into the creative space, I just chose to work in an independent realm. And so, I think that there's, a beautiful, robust movement of Black independent filmmaking that's happening that doesn't figure into this specific conversation. And in some ways, that's really lovely and empowering. In other ways, I know there's limited reach there for folks that are not consuming past that kind of dominant culture space. So yeah, my reaction was one of kind of horror, and in some ways relief that I'm not even participating in that space at all. And I don't have to judge myself according to what's not happening. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then there's me. It's interesting to see it up, but I also I know this sounds weird, but it's not a surprise to me. I know it. I deal with it, with my films and basically hit it straight on. I even with the Fantastic Four movies, I started off with the Barbershop and with the last movie with Think Like a Man, and then the movie that I'm just finishing up now with Ice Cube and Kevin Hart. I make it a point to do those movies where I can actually put black people as well as Latinos into those parts that they don't. So I hit it straight on, and I kind of go from it from a mainstream perspective, which is put them in the roles. Even for those of you who know Fantastic Four and know the comic book, Alicia was not black, and and I fought for that with Avi Arad to do that. So I know there's a problem, and I just decide to get the job, and then put whoever I think is going to be the best in those parts, and I always have got my eye open for actors of color. Just kind of the way I work.
Okay. How about Darnell, Russell? Any thoughts and your reactions to the presentations, or is this just so similar in terms of conversations we've had over the years with our data?
Yeah, I'm always interested to hear people who are working in the industry talk about their experiences. For me, it's sad. It's a sad commentary on kind of the state of the industry, but it helps us get a sense of sort of what the processes are and how we got to where we are. I mean, I'm curious, Tim. I mean, you've been extremely successful as we see in terms of your ranking among directors that have been working the last 10 years. I mean, do you feel when folks are developing deals that you're kind of in the same place in the line that some of these other people that I think most people who don't know your story would think of as the top directors?
When I go after projects, I must admit, once again, it sounds kind of weird. I don't care. I go in and it's worked thus far. So I guess at some point, if it really turns out to be a problem, I will change my way of going about it. But I go in and I kick ass, and I make it very hard for them to say no. And I've come up and I do a lot of research. I know when I'm walking into a room, whether it is a embracing room or a room that may not, and there may be some rooms I choose to stay out of just because, I'm not willing, I may not have the passion for it as much. But when I want a project and I know that I can do well with it, I go in with a passion that in the event they do say no, for whatever the reason, because in my business, you find the reasons for no are ridiculous. Sometimes they have nothing to do with you. They have to do with somebody was promised something years ago, and it just so happens they had to look at a few people so they can say, hey, we looked at a few people. But that job was already given to a certain person beforehand. So I just go in, but I've always said, just the way I've raised and just the way, just my experiences, if they say no, they're going to remember me. And this industry is small, and I do know that if they're around, which many of them are, that we're going to meet again. And that's just my attitude. I don't really believe I can have any other attitude. I'm going to make you aware.
I guess I'd be curious to know, as an academic, I'm outside of it, so I can, write about all the depressing statistics and then go home and do something else. This is your life, right? So how do you stay motivated and inspired in a really challenging world?
That's a great question.
Me or both of you?
That would be a question for you because I don't work in that world. I mean, I choose not to work in that world. I write, so I am interested in films about the interior lives of black women, which I cannot find a studio that's interested in that kind of story. I haven't looked, but I haven't seen it. Not interested in that type of story from the black woman's gaze. Maybe interested from it from a white man's gaze.
Right.
I want to watch a little black girl running around all the time if a white man's going to tell me how she runs around. But the nuance is that a black woman would bring a reflection as opposed to an interpretation of how she would run around is not something that there's an open door for. And I choose to, and there's different types of activism, there's different types of art, there's different ways that we as artists can approach it. And some people have a more activist spirit around knocking down those doors from the inside. For me, my time is precious and I would prefer to be making things. So I choose to make them in the only way that I know how, which is kind of outside of the context of literally beating my head against a wall, where I would come home and, not be able to even tell a story. So it's a choice. And I think, for me, I'm not from this environment, just in terms of the way that this data is being processed and reported. I really would invite you to look at the robust community of black filmmakers that have chosen and are actively working outside of the studio pitching, academy, those indicators of what success are, to the mainstream. there's a lot going on, and it's beautiful and it's vibrant. And I don't know how many of you here consume Black independent films, but there are. Thank you, the one sister in the corner. Thank you, my sister. It was you in the movie. There was just one, so I found her. But you know there's something going on there that I think is worth exploring, and I think is valid. And you know we also have to look at what our measures of validity are, and it's not always outside of us. Sometimes it's happening right within our community.
I guess in answering to your question, the motivation for it. Look, I love what I do. I have made it a point to. I don't know. It's an attitude I have. You know, if I wasn't working, I've gotten opportunities that I've taken advantage of. But I also know that if I hadn't had those opportunities, I would still be making movies. And so my you know, I started off, you know, as any independent, you know, with the $30,000 film that you made, you know, on your own, and then the $200,000 film that you made in your own. You were just $200,000 in debt, and I got the opportunity to do studio films, and in the event I did not get another studio film, I'm still going to be making movies. So the motivation comes from I love what I do, and at the end of the day, technology has given the ability to make movies. It's made it so much easier, and it's still, don't get me wrong, it's still hard to get a bunch of people to come together and do something, but at the same time, the technology of it makes it, you know, I do buy equipment constantly just because I never want to ask someone, can I go make this? And I do independent stuff all the time. You know, for the most part, you may not see it, but I love this. And so the motivation comes from within. It's not, I've just gotten some opportunities that have gone my way, but I love this stuff. It's just cool, you know. So my motivation is kind of within.
We actually just completed a study with the Sundance Institute looking at the independent realm, and we're continuing on with phase 2 and phase 3. And one of the issues that I think confronts anyone in the industry trying to tell stories is if they don't fit the norm, two things are a problem: financing and distribution. Right? You can't get a green light on your film because they want certain individuals either attached as director or attached on screen. And then distribution internationally becomes impediment. So Ava, I want to turn to something you've done, which is a solution. And your background as a publicist, your background as a director, but you're a distributor of content. Would you talk us through the African American Film Festival releasing movement, what it is, and how you're cultivating or curating audiences for content in the United States, and how has that been received by small and large theater chains around the country?
Yeah, it was ultimately a decision that I couldn't get around, which was if I was going to decide to make films and I knew the kind of films I was going to make, just as the entrepreneur in me, the publicist in me, the problem solver, whatever, I couldn't imagine making a film and not knowing the end game. Where was it going to go? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that was nowhere, because no one's going to put out that film about a black woman's intimate thoughts and feelings. There was no precedence for a studio scenario or a corporate structure that would pay to make sure that you all saw that. So I had to solve that problem before I started making films. And so the solve was a collaborative of like-minded people around the country, black arts activists around the country, film festivals, museums, film series that are prominent in their market. And we all came together under the moniker Affirm. And with my marketing and publicity experience and my investment in the company, we distribute small black independent films, art house films, black art house films, in major markets simultaneously. So we're like a Strand or a Zeitgeist. Mm-hmm. Their eyes are glazing over. Strand or a Zeitgeist or just many distributors, small distributors. Usually the independent, you're going to think people unfortunately think Weinstein, which is so not independent. But they may think Magnolia, they may think IFC. There's about, 20 to 30 distributors kind of under that are just even more indie, looking at, 2 to 5 markets before the film goes on to its ancillary prospects. And so we're in that space. We're right now in our 5th release. We started in 2011, so 2 years ago. We released our 5th film. We've acquired our 6th film that we'll be announcing in about a week. And so we all hold hands to distribute these films. I mean, really the idea was, what does it take to distribute a film? You need the theater, and you need butts and seats, and you need prints and advertising. And so we do prints. We substitute advertising with publicity and promotions. Butts and seats are coming from our collective of black film organizations around the country who are driving patrons to the theaters, and then an ongoing broadening of relationships with chains, repertory cinemas, art houses.
We just completed a study, and we found women rarely get the opportunity, if they want to go in that path, to be a director of action films, and they're slotted to only direct certain types of genres, which limits their experience. And I'm wondering, on the successes of Think Like a Man, did you start receiving different scripts or different calls from your agent with new opportunities, or are you often receiving the same types of opportunities in terms of, and is comedy something that's open for you to explore?
Yes, I kind of, with the team that I have around me, first to answer your question, with the success of that, you do get offered, in some cases, kind of like films like it, well, however you say that. And of course, with doing a romantic comedy like that, one thing that I've always done, which I guess you can kind of tell from my films in the past, is that I don't like to stick to the same genre. I make it a point, because if I don't, they won't. So I make it a point to, if I've done a romantic comedy, more than likely I will not do another romantic comedy. Definitely not the next film, but it probably won't be anytime soon, unless it is a sequel or something like that. So with the success of Think Like a Man, it kind of has, it's weird. It's kind of like there's been the doors that have been open, and then they sometimes close shut a little bit, and then they open up again. And I make it a point to go after the other things. And what I mean by that is, they're not quick to say, hey, do you want to do whatever it is, the next another comic book movie, or I just went to meet on a children's book idea that deals with CGI characters and this and that. They don't know that you want to do it unless you tell them you want to do it. And so I, with my team, tell them I'd like to go read on, or I'd like to go meet on this. And what is good about the success of movies like Think Like a Man is, and the fact that I've done things like Fantastic Four, and I've shown kind of an array of the things I like to do, is they can't pigeonhole you, and they can't really say, well, he only does that. And I understand that it is on purpose. It is something that I strategically work on to do stuff that they can never pinpoint you. The next film I have coming out is an action comedy with guns blazing and this and that, and I've never done that. And I make it a point to change, because if you don't, they will, I'll just get romantic comedies for, when I did Barbershop, after Barbershop came out, it was movies all like that. And one of the main reasons, one, I wanted to work with Lateef when I did like the script, but I went after Taxi because it was different. And then Fan 4 because it was different. And you have to make it a point to open, different doors, or else, they'll just send you the same stuff.
Okay. Great. Well, why don't we take about 20, 25 minutes to open up to questions right here in the front. And JP, are we going to have, okay, we have a mic. Great.
Hi, my name's
We can hear you.
Hi, my name's Helena Ray Johnson, and my question for the panel is there a moment that you can recall? Okay, is there a moment that you can recall that was a pivotal point in your career, like something happened and you said, this is who I'm going to be now and this is what I want to do?
For our filmmakers or?
Well, for everyone.
Oh.
Well, gentlemen.
Well, I actually did have a moment. I was a visiting professor at Fordham Law School and preparing to go on the market and figuring out how to frame myself. And I think this relates to a question that somebody else might ask later on, but in terms of, I thought about framing myself as like as basically an entertainment law, non-race person. I'm going to do intellectual property, but I won't talk about race. And I tried to write that article, and I was like, you know what, I'm not really feeling this. And so I figured out that I had to be true to myself. And since then, I feel like everything that I've written has come from my heart and my own experiences, and it's stronger because of that. So I sort of, maybe it's hokey, but I followed my heart, and I think that my work is a lot better for it.
I also have a moment. I was working in the newsroom at WRC TV in Washington, D.C. I was an NBC fellow, and I'm there in the newsroom. It's a majority African-American city. The news staff was almost entirely white. I was sitting in editorial meetings in the morning and listened to them talk about what I knew to be upper middle-class black neighborhoods as ghettos. And it just really shocked me because most of the on-air talent was African-American, but the people making the decisions and writing stories didn't really have a lot of sensitivity to the communities they were covering. So I just started doing some reading, and I found a few things on race and media, but not a lot. And most of the things that really piqued my curiosity were in sociology. And from that moment on, instead of taking a job in Chicago doing what my boss in D.C. was doing, I applied to PhD programs and ultimately made my way back to California to UCLA, and here I am.
I guess I did an independent film where I raised $30,000 and shot a movie on 16 millimeter, and my one goal was to put it in the Baldwin Theater, which is no longer around. And I put it in the Baldwin Theater and invited all my friends and family and packed the theater, and and the print broke and just everything went wrong that night. But the thing, we finally got it working and blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, to fill a theater and see people watch your movie, I was hooked, and that's kind of it.
It's a good feeling. I was a publicist. I was working on the set of a film that's shot in Los Angeles, directed by Michael Mann, called Collateral. And we were shooting in East LA. It was a really cold night, middle of the night. He's upset about something. It was just a mess. One of those days where you're like, I don't want to be crew today. And I remembered around the corner, I had, because I'm from LA, I had a personal experience around the corner from where we were shooting previously. And just started thinking about why was I spending time on somebody else's set when I had a story on these streets of my own. And started writing my film Middle of Nowhere like the next week while I was still also working as a publicist, and wrote on nights and weekends, and eventually made my way to my own set.
My journey was very different. I got a phone call and was asked to do a study. And once we did the study and I ran the analyses by gender and by race, I couldn't believe what I saw in terms of the underrepresentation of different groups. And from that moment, I said, I can do something about this, right? I can do research on this and inform the conversation. And from that moment in 2005, I don't think we've really stopped. We've done about 30, 35 studies. We don't plan on stopping until we see change. I think that's the goal. Yeah. In the back, yeah.
Hi. Is it on? Congratulations to everyone. I'm a writer, used to work at UCLA. 2 questions. Someone mentioned casting. Can the panel speak to Zoe Saldana being cast as Nina Simone? Second question. They talk about that black films don't do well overseas. Please, panel, talk about that. And just a sidebar, when I was in Brazil, you would not know that there were black people in Brazil if you looked at TV.
Right.
wants to comment on the first question? Russell, do you want to take
This
that?
might be better for the artist. I don't know. That, Zoe Saldana.
Zoe Saldana, yeah. Nina Simone.
I'm not exactly sure if we can comment on it. I mean, I think, on one side of it's hooray, and on the other side it's like, wow, okay. I'm sorry, I don't exactly know how to comment on it. I don't. I know Zoe, so it's kind of like more work, go. But I can't really comment one way or another.
I'll just say I think the issue perfectly encapsulates what we're talking about in the industry in the sense that you have this story that needs to be told, that it's high time it's told, but then you're kind of limited in terms of who can play the role because there has to be that box office draw. At least conventional wisdom says that only certain type of people can carry it. Now, of course, it hasn't been made yet. We don't know what it's going to do. It may be a great film, but that, I think, is the reality we're talking about.
And I would just add, I think oftentimes I feel a sense of a sort of a double bind, if you will, which is, and I think this is kind of what Tim was alluding to, that you see something that's problematic, but you also know that Zoe Saldana has limited options as well as a woman of color, right? Viola Davis in The Help, like I was like, should I root for that? I don't know, right? I mean, so it's really hard. I love Viola, right? But I don't love The Help. Right? So I think that we're oftentimes put in that box of trying to figure out how do I support my brothers and sisters of color, but also criticize a system that forces them into these situations.
Well, how about Viola for Nina?
I would have done that casting in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Okay, let's deal with the second aspect of the question because I think that in a lot of work there is perception and there's reality. Right? And there's a lot of mythologizing about what does or doesn't sell. And if you do the economic analyses, sometimes, at least we know on our team, the mythologizing about what sells internationally doesn't always match the economic data that you collect and analyze. And we've done some of this work with women on screen, and it does translate internationally, and it can make money. So my question then, for all of you, what's the mythologizing or the reality about international distribution? Like, what was your distribution strategy for Think Like a Man? And are they curating that audience? Are they cultivating that audience for that success?
No. It is perplexing. Like I got to tell you, just Think Like a Man did what it did, and the most interesting story out of our quote-unquote foreign theatrical distribution, whatever you want to call it, was we were banned in France for not, and you guys might even know better than I do, not adequately representing the population. I couldn't understand it because then you go, so wait a minute, did you guys, he's really not that into you. Did you put that one out there? It was perplexing, and I don't understand it. I don't really know if I ever will. There's a part of me that almost is about to stop because with Think Like a Man specifically, for us to do where we were, and when you look at the movies that make 90 plus million in the States, they're going to go on to at least make 40. In most cases probably the same as what they made in the States, and they're just not interested in taking the challenge. We made our movie for $13 million, so at that point it becomes we made our money. Right. And to go into a market that they've had no success in, it means they're going to have to break some ground and they're going to have to spend more money, and they take it as we've made our money. And so I tell you guys, I am as perplexed as anybody else. I don't get it.
The industry runs a lot on self-fulfilling prophecy. There are these conventional wisdoms that prevent people from taking what they see as risks of certain sorts, and of course they never, give certain things a shot. And of course the cautionary tale becomes when there's that one exception that doesn't make it for whatever reason, then you can forget it. That's not going to be done again for another 20 years or whatever. So I think that's kind of what we're up against as well. One of the things that I'm interested in that we're working on at the Bunche Center right now is a pretty massive study of diversity in the industry, kind of looking at, everything behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, and more importantly, trying to relate that in some way to the bottom line. Now, the problem is we don't have lots of examples where, they took the risk to try to promote something internationally, so that we can say, aha, here's a success story, and this is why that worked. But there are a few examples, and there are some films that are remarkably diverse in many ways, that have incredible return on investment, that defy all the logics in terms of why they succeed. And if you look at the entire universe of films, in our case, the top 200 grossing films on a yearly basis, and then relate that to all those behind-the-scene factors, you can start to find the patterns.
Right.
You can start to find the best practices.
Right.
You can start to find the obstacles. And when you pair that statistical analysis with some good qualitative, okay, talk to me about your distribution deal. What happened? How did it come to you? I think we can start to unlock some of the doors that have been shut, in terms of our understanding of what's really happening and why they do what they do.
Are you looking at production costs and marketing?
Yeah, we are. I mean,
you-
the challenge, of course, is getting as comprehensive a data set as possible, because we're reaching out to maybe about 20 different sources of data to kind of piece the story together, because not everyone is forthcoming. And if you go to most of the studios and networks, of course, they want to put a positive spin on what they do. So you can't always rely upon the numbers they give you.
Right.
So there are other sources that we're using as well. But the goal is to, yes, look at production costs, look at advertising, marketing budgets, and also look at domestic as well as international box office in film and ratings in TV.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
If I could just say one
Sure.
quick thing to that. As a distributor who has distributed our films internationally, it is a difficult road. There's no architecture around the exploitation of films of color abroad. And I mean, it's not a surprise to me, because there's no architecture for it here either.
Right.
So when people are like, it's like, well, it's a mirror. It's very difficult to get anything more than kind of Mr. Perry's work in France or the UK. You look at Eastern Europe, it's very difficult. You look at English-speaking European countries like, predominantly English-speaking, like Stockholm. I was just in Stockholm. I was just in Amsterdam taking meetings for Black independent films, namely because we don't have to subtitle there, so it's a lesser cost in the translation. You look at the continent, you look at Africa, you look at Asia. There's no one going over there to do that work, to do those meetings. There's no one doing it here either. So it's going to take people who are activated around the issue going and kind of, mining that new territory. And it's just not being done, certainly for smaller to mid-scale films. There's no upside financially to creating a whole new kind of business model. I think the person, if I had an extra body and mind, I think the person that cracks that is so the winner, because when you just look at the archived material out of all the studios, just take the studios, not independent work, all that archived material, they will literally throw it at you if you could figure out a way to exploit it in any format, any ancillary format. I mean, VOD's not even popping off over there for Black and brown films. So in any format, in any way that you can create an ancillary pathway, let alone a theatrical pathway to some international markets, international territories. Even a sales agent, one sales agent that's known for it. There is not one sales agent. I mean, we won Sundance. There were films that did nothing at Sundance, and yet they're picked up by sales agents left and right. No one in it that you know, nothing that you know except white. That's what I know. I know it's white, so that must be better than this. And if there's not one sales agent, I mean, we went to sales agents that were taking porn, selling, almost porn, that would not take, Middle of Nowhere, or, I've talked with Dave Seamus about Pariah, or these beautiful, Medicine for Melancholy, these beautiful films that do well here in the independent art house space that can find no traction abroad. So it's really going to be kind of, I think, an activist singular effort by some group or people who decide that that's their passion and they're going to make that work. I think there's a lot of financial upside. It won't be in one project, but in the cumulative effect of just all of the projects that are unexploited international rights for almost every Black film, studio and otherwise, in the last 30 years, sitting there untouched. Wish I could figure it out. So, can't. No time. Maybe one of you will do it.
Other questions? Right back here. Yeah.
I have a question. One, this is for everyone on the panel. These statistics and these sort of things, they're crushing, and they make you feel very small. in a lot of respects. And I just wanted to know, is there any advice for filmmakers that you guys have in terms of how to overcome these sorts of issues? And to Ms. DuVernay, this idea that the independent filmscape for people of color, can you speak to it all, the fact that it seems like even in terms of the independent film space, the avenue for that is the film festivals. And a lot of these film festivals, you know, they don't have programmers or people at those festivals who are of color. So then what is the route? And how does the filmmakers work not just for reactionary, you know what I mean, trying to tell stories that white people want to hear and see about black people? I don't know, I'm saying a lot, I don't know. Did you guys hear the question, or?
I understand, my brother. I understand. I know you. You made a beautiful film. You know, it wasn't as widely seen as it should be. That's the reality. You're an artist. Are you going to not make that film that means something to you because the path's not going to be easy, because there aren't enough black programmers at Sundance, at South by, at Tribeca, at LA Film Fest? We know the ones that are there. You know a couple of them very well. It's a handful. So that's definitely a barrier. But we also know that there are beautiful Black and Latino film festivals that do embrace. I think for me as an artist, it's recalibrating what is success. Mm-hmm. What is success? Am I trying to get to that Oscar? Am I trying to be standing there with, you know? Do I want that? Is what they tell me is the measure of success, the measure of these studies? Is that what I'm reaching toward? Or am I, as an artist, making what I need to make and sharing with who wants to receive it? And I think that may feel a little new agey for like all the data that's being presented, but ultimately when you break down that data, this is a creative endeavor. Mm-hmm. And what is going to inform that for you? I could sit there, we can all sit there. I mean, that's devastating information to hear that. Was it 20 years, 3 women, 10 years?
11.
11 years that there were 3 women in that category, black women, me, 3 of us. And, you know, to go down that rabbit hole and that vortex of kind of self-loathing that puts you in is a useless exercise, my brother. Make your thing and find your audience and make your next thing. Ultimately, we come from a strong legacy of black independent filmmakers. You know, Julie Dash, Haile Garima, Charles Burnett. I mean, and we talk about us. When's the last time you saw a native film? Native. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, Asian, Latino. Those statistics are sick. So do you keep banging your head against the wall trying to break into this dominant culture, or do we create something vibrant and validate ourselves? That's what I'm doing. It's the only way I can stay sane. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the only way I could stay sane as a writer and director who has a very specific vision about what I want to put out. So.
Dean Wilson.
Yeah, just a quick question. One is looking back at, same question looking back and forward. What's been the role of mentorship in your careers? Are there particular moments when you are on one trajectory and someone steps forward and says, hey, there's another whole world, there's another set of skills? So that's the part that's kind of looking retroactively. And if that is important, would it make sense to try to work with young people of color and women on the mentorship issue? You know, could we think about some sort of program that would develop a sense of mentorship among those who've made it, and also a sense of what it means to be a mentee, to seek out a mentor? So I'd be very interested in the panel's reaction to that.
You've made it. What do you think?
No, I actually do a lot with USC's cinema school, and even when most of my films that I've shot have been out of state. I've only done one film in Los Angeles. When I do stuff out of state, we also take people of color out there and bring them on set and work with them as much as we can. We sometimes not everybody wants to be a director in those situations, so we will put them in areas that they are interested in, whether it's camera, whether it's being a grip, whether it's being sound recording, whatever it is. So I do as much as I can, and it's been very rewarding. And when I'm at the cinema school, I do with some of the students that are there, exchange email addresses and this and that, and do as much as I can. It's not always easy because I'm moving a lot in terms of where I am actually located, but I've got a lot of quote unquote pen pals, in terms of helping them and giving them advice on whatever I can give back.
What about your own career? Were there a couple of moments when someone stepped forward to help you out, and that really had a substantial change or impact on your
Absolutely.
career?
Stan Lathan is a director, has done film, but mainly in his success was in television. He was someone that really helped me in terms of getting me, sign my DGA card, so forth and so on, and also just was able to spend a lot of time with him and work with him. And then of course, and then others, I must admit, others mentors might not be so much quote unquote successful filmmakers. It was actually teachers, and actually acting teachers and directing teachers and so forth and so on. So for me it was I look in interesting places for my teachers, just because as you get, I guess, quote unquote, better at your skill set, you're looking for actually the outside, that different perspective than where you come from. So I'm all over the place in terms of what, where I look for my mentors.
Great. I think, hey, JP, how are we doing on time? How much time do we have? One more question? Okay. How about the gentleman back here in the glasses? Yeah.
Hi. My name's
White
Kirby.
people are asking questions. I thought I'd just say that. White folk don't have no questions. Can we get one more, Mr. Gutierrez? One white after this brother. I love the black people's questions, but there's a whole segment back there. You're welcome to ask questions.
We'll have one more question.
Yes.
I'll do a little show and tell. My name's Kirby Washington. I have 20 years in the business as in the Cinematographers Guild. I'm a camera operator. This was left for me on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank on a movie that Halle Berry starred in. Things haven't gotten much better than that. So my question is about below the line, using Title VII and other ways to address the horrible situation for black people that are working at the craft in this industry.
Where did Russell go? He needed water. Oh, here he comes.
Okay.
We might have to have you repeat your question. I apologize. Were you able to hear that, Russell?
No, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? Yeah, I'll show you the noose again too. I kept this because I taught for 3 semesters at a school called Hollywood CPR, and I wanted my students of color to know what they were getting into. But this was left for me on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank. It's not much. The verbal stuff is not much different. I was told by a supervisor that he was going to bring in a Ku Klux Klan hood for me to wear because he didn't like watching my lips move when I talk. The response of the unions is always, you complained about it wrong, we can't help you. The studios, it looks like they're playing a game of Twister to get away from dealing with this. So my question was about Title VII and any other remedies that would do something to address this. And I should say also, my union, last time we checked, was 1.7% African American. The Cinematographers Guild.
So it's very disturbing to hear, and I have heard other reports like that. The challenge usually is that people are unwilling to risk their standing in the industry by suing, and the people tell you don't rock the boat. And so if you are willing to sort of, sign on the dotted line and take a stand, then I think that we should talk afterward. And I know there's a center at UCLA that's doing some work on labor practices in the industry and looking at race. So I can connect you with them. And in general, I think that people see so many wrongful practices, but the industry basically threatens people. Look, if you object, you'll never eat lunch in this town again. Right? And it's very effective. So I hope that people will find ways to report their stories, even if it's anonymously on the internet or whatever, but just so we can sort of share information and that people can find ways to tell their stories and to organize and still preserve their career opportunities.
Okay, we're going to take one more question with Doe Mayer. Doe. Oh, okay. I'm giving you your way. Your way. Okay.
I'm actually half Egyptian, if that's okay. But but I pass as white. My question is really about the doors and the they and the them that have been referred to a lot, and getting, a lot of what you've been talking about is getting, through those doors, or what they think or what them say, So really, isn't it about getting more representation with capital and the people holding the money, or what are the other theys that you think we need to address?
I mean, I don't know. I was talking from a place of not knocking on closed door, building your own house on your own door. So I try not to work in a permission-based way, and that's just my own choice. So I don't know. We're talking about the studio system. We're talking about corporate structures that oversee art and entertainment, and those days are controlled by white men. And I wouldn't even say people with money. I would say white men. People with money of all kinds give their money to white men to make the decisions about what's going to be seen. So I guess that's the they, and those are the doors that folks are talking about. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I am going to take one more question from Doe Mayer, documentary filmmaker. Doe, why don't you close out this session?
The industry's in flux. I don't think anyone in their right mind thinks they know what this is going to look like in 10 years. I'm wondering how you might think that the changes that are coming, whether those changes have to do with technology or distribution or other mechanisms of filmmaking and film exhibition, are going to affect these problems. Do you think that any of the newer things that we think might be coming down the pike in this context might affect more people being able to see different kinds of pictures?
Yeah. Let me just take a stab at that really quickly. The industry has been remarkably adept at adapting to technological change. I think, the vertical integration we've seen, we talk about new media and opportunities in new media, but quickly it seems like even that's being structured in a way that's making it harder to reach the eyeballs that we thought we might reach were it truly democratic. You know what I mean? Net neutrality issues. There are all these different issues that potentially affect how much access we'll actually have to diverse audiences. Now, that might sound pessimistic. History suggests to me that it probably is not the story that we would like to see. But I'm a cautious optimist. I think that if we're strategic and if we pursue our own projects, our own stories, as Ava was saying, I think that there are ways to possibly circumvent what might seem to be inevitable. But it's going to be difficult, and it really is a multi-frontal type of struggle that we have to face. I think that we have to do our own stuff, but we have to continually demand that the cartels and everything else are broken up. Because they do have access to a lion's share of the audience, and I don't, as a sociologist, I don't think that's a good thing. We've been talking primarily about access and jobs and employment, but what about the impact on society in terms of the images we see and the stories that circulate and how that affects what we can consider to be normal and how children think of themselves when they're growing up and so forth and so on. And so these are all the things that the major studios and conglomerates have a huge amount of influence over. And I think that, even though we're doing our own thing, we have to somehow or another, some of us at least, have to continually try to change that picture as well.
From a filmmaker standpoint, I think it's actually pretty exciting what's going on, is because you're right. The film studios are I won't say they're terrified, but they're confused. Because right now, if you're making, the fantasy, sci-fi, comic book, whatever the case may be, they're not, just as we've seen in television, they're not making the drama between 35 million and 80 million anymore, which is why so many great actors have gone to television, which is why all of the writers have gone to television. And so what I've also seen is that I just had I don't know if you guys are familiar with Issa Rae, who started doing this thing on TV. And I just had a chance to become fairly close with her over the last, few months in talking about just her show and just what the future is. And what I've started doing in the makeup of my business model is, even though film is my bread and butter, I am now putting a lot of research into television, in the sense that as a filmmaker, I may find that the medium for me may actually be television at some point, mainly because if I go out and make that product and I make a character or characters that resonate, nicely, then I can put that, literally you can have your own channel now. So you can put that out, and in the event you get followers, why not revisit those characters as opposed to looking at it from a one-time, one-film medium? You might have to start saying, look, let me create a TV series, and I'm going to do, instead of doing that film, I'm going to do 4 episodes, and I'm just going to put it out. And in the event it grabs, and we also know that they don't have to be 30 minutes and an hour long. They can be 12 minutes long. They can be 8 minutes long. You as a filmmaker, you might have to also adapt with what's going on. So I think it's to me it's exciting because and like I've said before, I was talking to somebody, I might have said it up here, I don't remember, getting old. But I've started buying equipment because it allows me to go out and just shoot. And I think everyone has to look at what they, I like comedies, and comedies right now are still a profit-making thing in feature films. But when I think about doing a drama, I might have to think about maybe I do a pilot and look at it from that standpoint. So it's I think it's exciting. The studios are confused. There are, in a second, it will just be who has money to make the product. When you hear that Netflix is making TV series and Google has a division and YouTube is now funding television shows, you got to open your eyes and go, wait a minute. I can make a show with my friends next weekend and edit it, put music together, because you can use any music you want. You don't, it's not like you're going to get sued. You're not making money from it. And put it on the web. And if somebody sees that show and says, I like what you did, we're going to pick it up, you have to do this and do that. And I say that to you because I've seen it done, and I know the artists that are getting involved with it, as well as myself, that it's an exciting time. Open your eyes. Don't let the fact that that film that I didn't get to where I want. There may be another way to package that, that thing, your talent.
Great. Well, I hope that all of you will join us for our reception after the panel. Please join me in just thanking our guests.